There are needs all around us. Constantly, every day, 24/7, we're bombarded by needs that we feel challenged to address, much less meet. Hurricanes, earthquakes, HIV/AIDS pandemic, starving children, orphans. Wow, really, we are so challenged to simply get through the day and get dinner on the table and get our kids kind of orchestrated and our lives running smoothly that we look at the needs and we think, I can't make a dent, so maybe I won't do anything. A dent doesn't matter to us. I think we think so often that we have to do everything. We have to do all that we could in order to make a dent. And I wonder if that's really true. In the book of Mark, Mary of Bethany gives us an example of a woman who decided to make a dent, to bring her action forward into a moment, knowing that it might not fix the situation, but giving it nevertheless. Let's take a look at this story from Mark chapter 14, verses 1 through 9. Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she's done will also be told in memory of her." Oh, wow. This story I've heard a million times, and so have you. I've heard it preached. I've done Bible studies on it. I always focused on the really expensive perfume and the whiny disciples, and this whole scene played before me. But when we really focus in on 5 words in verse 8, to me, the entire context, and therefore the application of this passage, changes. She did what she could. 5 words. Jesus said she did a beautiful thing. She did what she could. And he actually paired her action with the gospel for all time to come. I think about that. Well, I don't hear she did what she could in the story of Mary of Bethany every time I go, say to Christmas Eve service and the gospel's proclaimed, or on Easter Sunday. What did Jesus mean by that? And I think as we look into the passage and see these 5 words unpacked, we understand that Mary lived, loved. She got that Jesus loved her. And she got that maybe the way to love him back was to serve, was to put his love in her in action in her world, to do the one thing in the moment, to do something right then and there. She did what she could. Mary of Bethany, she was just a woman, a girl. Hey, and by the way, God chose a girl here to pair with the gospel for all time to come. I love that. I love that. Mary was the sister of hardworking Martha and up from the grave Lazarus. And probably this whole situation, the banquet that she was participating in, happened in her father's house, Simon, the healed leper. Mary did what she could. Mary did what she could. She got up and acted. She didn't just think about acting. She didn't say to herself, well, I'm going to do something sometime. No. In this moment, in this juncture between the past and the present, the Old Testament and the New Testament, before Jesus' death on the cross and after it, she acted in that moment, in a moment that she knew she'd never get back again. She did. And then she did what she could. Mary picked up her what, which was nard. Nard was a really expensive oil. It came from spikenard, probably an herb or a plant from India. It was incredibly valuable. In fact, the amount that she poured out and anointed Jesus' head with was probably equal to 300 denarii, a year's wages. Something like the Chanel number 5 of its day. An amazing gesture of self-sacrifice. But I don't really think it's the self-sacrifice that Jesus elevates here in this passage. I think Jesus mainly elevated the fact that Mary acted with her what in this moment. She anointed his body before his death, in a moment when it mattered to him, in a moment that would never be repeated in all of human history. She did what she could. Looking deeper at the she here, this story is told in two other Gospels. It's told in Matthew and it's told in John. There is a shadow story in Luke 7 that's told, and we often get it confused, but it's actually not the same story. It's a different woman, a different Simon, the same Jesus, but a different message. She did what she could. Mary of Bethany understood who Jesus was. She somehow got that he was the Messiah, that he was going to the death on the cross for her and for the sins of all humankind. And in this moment, she did what she alone could do. She got up and she gave her what? To comfort him in this moment, in this room, with all the religious leaders and the disciples around her. She did what she could. Mary took what she possessed and invested it. Wow. And in that moment, she acted in public. She could have done this in private, but she acted in public. And as a result, she challenged everybody there by saying, this is who I believe Jesus is. This is what I think it means to look like, to live love, and to receive his message into my soul. Now, what are you going to do with him? She did what she could, and as a result, she was ridiculed. Everybody made fun of her, and they rebuked her harshly. And just when they thought Jesus would rise up and rebuke her as well, he turned on them, and he said, leave her alone. She's done a beautiful thing. She did what she could. She lived, loved. She made her gesture. She acted out, because honestly, the gospel is our faith with feet on it. It's living loved in our world. What if I did what I could? There are so many times I don't. I think about living next door to some neighbors when I was first married, and I spent so much of my time just evaluating how they kept their lawn up or didn't, how they disciplined their children or didn't, how they would let their little kids run around with fudgesicle smiles all through the day, and I'm like, oh, tacky, how can you do that? And one day when Janet came over to connect with me in my front yard, she said, I wondered if you and Eva would like to go to church with us. I'm like, seriously, you don't go to church? I didn't think they did. And I found out that Janet and her husband, Rusty, had had a terrible time in their marriage and had to get out the yellow pages to find a church to go to because they didn't have anyone to turn to. I lived next door. I never reached out to her. I didn't do what I could. What if I did? What if you did? What if, like Mary of Bethany, we understood that in these minutes, we don't have to do all we could? What if we just did what we could? What if that's what it means to live loved?
Every one of us has been created for a certain purpose, and it's so freeing and so fulfilling when we're able to put our faith into action. When I was a teenager, I had a vision. I had a vision of having a home for unwed mothers. I had this dream, and I had a vision that there was a home that I would be involved with someday. It was a home for these girls. And all I could see is that I had to walk up a hill to this home. And as I entered in it, there was this great entrance, and there was a stairway going upstairs. And I had that dream, and it was so impactful that I shared it with my husband at the time, who was my boyfriend. And he listened, but the dream just got buried. We got married. We had 4 children in 5 years. We began raising them, and life seemed to go on until our 16-year-old daughter came home pregnant. And as I broke the news to my husband, one of the first things he said to me is, do you remember that dream you had when we were dating? And of course, that was a little overwhelming for me at the moment, and I didn't want to start with my own daughter. But God began to work in our hearts. So I decided to follow that old dream I had as a teenager. I found out about a new ministry starting. It's a ministry that wants to walk alongside women as they experience an unplanned pregnancy. And part of the dream for that ministry was the housing part. I interviewed for a board position, and they asked me to be on the board. And since then, I've been promoted to vice president, which is kind of scary. What really affirmed me in my walk in obedience with God is this last summer, the founder of the ministry was contacted by someone who invited our ministry to have the use of a home. And as I drove up the hill and entered the house with the big entryway, there was a staircase going upstairs. And that's where I'm at in my spiritual journey and in my obedience and following God and knowing that I have found my little sweet spot of ministry and service to Him. Now, the ministry that I'm involved with is using the home with the same vision that I had as a teenager. And it's just affirmed with me that God's got me right where He wants me. And trembling and fear and anticipation and joy, I get to serve Him this way.
Mary of Bethany lived, loved. She really understood who Jesus was, and as a result of Him loving her, she wanted to love Him back. Jesus said she did a beautiful thing by anointing Him. She did what she could. You know, there are a lot of times when we don't do what we could, probably holding back out of fear or inadequacy or uncertainty. I mean, after all, if I can't do all I could to address the needs around me, why bother, I think? But Mary's an example to me. It wasn't the point of doing all she could that Jesus pointed out. He said she did what she could, and He said it was beautiful, and He paired it with the gospel. I think I can move from not doing what I could to doing what I could if I can grab a hold of the fact that maybe this is how I love Jesus back, by doing what I could. Sometimes it's a big deal to do what we could, and sometimes it's a small, everyday matter. I remember going into my office and opening up my email and seeing an email from a woman that I really didn't know that well, who shared with a group of us that she was really struggling. Her daughter was pregnant, she didn't know where to turn, and she ended the email with, "I don't know why I'm writing you. I don't even know you all that well, but I guess I don't have anyone else to talk to." That got me. I opened up my planner and I found an hour in my day, and I wrote her and I said, "Would you like to have coffee?" And she said yes. So I drove to the coffee shop and I met her and I listened. That's all I did. But I did that. I didn't offer to have her teenage daughter come and live with me through the pregnancy. I just listened. I did what I could. I remember another time my then about 4 or 5-year-old grandson, Marcus, was spending the night with me, and I like to use intercom so that I can hear him in the middle of the night if he should need me. And I awoke in the middle of the night and it was honestly just too quiet, and so I went upstairs to check on him. And I looked down on him and he looked a little bit too still in his little youth bed. So I put my hand on his back and I touched him. And he shot up and looked at me and I was like, "Oh no!" He goes, "Yaya, my tummy hurts. Would you lay with me?" And I thought about it and I thought, "Oh, I don't want to be up all night." But then I thought, that's not what he asked. He didn't say, "Yaya, will you be up all night?" He said, "Would you lay with me?" And I thought I could. And I climbed over the rail and I laid down with my grandson. I did what I could. Sometimes doing what we could is an everyday action. Maybe it's staying married. Maybe it's dog sitting an adult son's Rottweiler. It's 94 pounds and we think, "I can't handle that." Maybe it's adopting a child. Maybe it's a global effort like sponsoring a relief effort. Maybe it's a local effort like helping the homeless right in my neighborhood, or tutoring a child, or mentoring a young woman. When we do what we could, we make a dent in the amazing tsunami of need around us. No, we won't erase it. But when I do what I could, and you do what you could, and together we do what we could, like Mary of Bethany, we love Jesus back. We put feet on our faith. We make a difference in our world.